Imagine it. The year is 284 CE. The sound isn't distant drum sound or cheering crowds yet. No, it's the horrific metallic screech of solid gold grinding against bone, echoing from the Roman street. You are there, trapped, pressed against a stone wall, one of thousands, barely able to draw breath, forced to witness the spectacle. Your only job today is to watch, to remember. In the centre of the agonizing procession, a woman stumbles forward. Her wrists are raw, wounded, not by coarse rope, but by her own wealth. 40 pounds of solid gold chains suffocating her arms, her neck, her ankles, weigh her down so heavily that 2 Roman guards must walk beside her, holding the chains aloft, preventing her collapse onto the unforgiving cobblestones. That very gold was hers just 3 months ago. It funded her armies, erected her magnificent temples, solidified her as the most formidable woman between Egypt and Turkey. Now it is her tormentor, crushing her with every step. This is Zenobia of Palmyra, the legendary queen of the East, the woman who had dared to humiliate 3 Roman emperors, who had commanded an empire of 70,000 soldiers. Now she shuffles through the heart of Rome, a captive on display. The crowd erupts in screams, rotten fruit splatters against her chest, a glob of spit lands on her face, but she cannot wipe it away. Her hands are pinned down by the very stolen wealth that once defined her power. A child points, giggling. His mother lifts him higher, ensuring he sees every detail of her degradation. But here's what you cannot see from the street, what no Roman could ever hope to fathom. Inside Zenobia's mind, a single unwavering thought repeats with every agonizing step. A prayer whispered since dawn, a desperate plea unlike any they would expect. Not save me, not grant me strength, just 3 simple words. Let it be the villa. Because she knows the 2 doors that await her at the end of this interminable road. One leads to a comfortable gilded prison, where she will live out her days as a Roman trophy, a constant, living reminder of their supremacy. The other leads to a dark, forgotten hole, carved deep into the Capitoline Hill, where Rome silences its enemies in the dark, erasing them utterly, ensuring nothing remains. 4 kilometers of not knowing which door bears her name, 4 kilometers of smiling Romans, their faces alight with cruelty, deciding her very existence. 4 kilometers of praying to gods who have never once answered her calls. This was Rome's favoured ritual for captured queens, not just Zenobia and not just once. This was a system meticulously perfected over 700 years, designed with singular focus to break the most powerful women in the ancient world. And Zenobia, in the grand, terrifying calculus of Roman justice, was considered one of the lucky ones. The fates of others made execution seem like a merciful escape. But before you can truly comprehend what happened to those queens who were not so fortunate, you must first understand the true nature of a Roman triumph. Forget everything you've witnessed in movies. The reality was far more chilling. When a Roman general secured a decisive victory in a major war, the Senate could grant him a triumph, the highest honour imaginable in Roman society. It was a massive parade, a procession winding through the very heart of the city, a jubilant celebration of his conquest. Yet this was far more than a mere parade. It was psychological warfare, meticulously disguised as a party. The procession commenced at the Field of Mars, just beyond the city walls. It snaked its way through the labyrinthine streets for nearly 4 kilometres, culminating at the magnificent Temple of Jupiter, perched atop the Capitoline Hill. The entire city shut down for this event. Over 1 million people would line the route, an ocean of expectant faces. Shops closed, courts adjourned. Even slaves were granted the day off. Their freedom for a few hours used to watch other slaves, their counterparts paraded in chains. Here's how the procession unfolded, and I want you to imagine yourself as a captured queen, witnessing this unfolding horror, knowing it is for you. First, you would hear the music. Trumpets blaring, drums thundering, their echoes reverberating off the ancient stone buildings, a cacophony that would bounce through the narrow streets for almost an hour before anything tangible came into view. Then the carts would appear, wagon after wagon, groaning under the weight of the treasure plundered from your kingdom. Gold coins struck by your ancestors, silver plates from which your grandmother once ate, sacred artifacts ripped from the temples your people had built and revered for centuries. The crowd would roar with each passing cart, their cheers fueled by a cruel calculation. How much their own taxes would decrease, now that Rome possessed your wealth. Following the treasure came the paintings, massive wooden boards hoisted aloft by slaves depicting scenes of your cities ablaze, your soldiers falling, your palace being ruthlessly looted. Roman artists travelled with the legion specifically to capture these moments of destruction. The crowd would point at the paintings, laughing, recognizing your capital, cheering when they saw it consumed by flames. Next, the animals, exotic creatures from your homeland, now caged and shackled. Majestic lions pacing restlessly in their confines. Powerful elephants chained and subdued. Strange, colourful birds chirping sadly within gilded cages. Each animal was living proof that Rome had conquered not merely your people, but your very land, your ecosystem, your essence. And then, silence. A sudden chilling hush would fall over the vast crowd. The drumbeat would slow, becoming a mournful, deliberate thud, because now the prisoners would appear, first the common soldiers. Hundreds of them, chained together, shuffling forward, their heads bowed in defeat. They knew their destination, the slave markets. Their lives as free men were irrevocably over, but the crowd barely glanced at them. They were merely preamble. The crowd was waiting for you. The captured rulers walked at the very front of this column of despair, still clad in royal garments, still adorned with the remnants of crowns and jewellery. This too was deliberate. A beaten peasant meant nothing, but a queen, still cloaked in silk and gold, still recognisable as the formidable ruler who had dared to defy Rome, now shuffling in chains, wounded, exhausted, profoundly humiliated. That was the message, resounding across the ancient world. No crown protects you, no army saves you, no throne is beyond our reach. And here's the crucial detail the movies never show you, the agonising uncertainty. Some captured rulers survived the triumph. They might be exiled, granted comfortable imprisonment, or even absorbed into Roman society. Others were executed the moment the parade concluded, led into an underground prison known as the Tullianum, while the celebrations continued undiminished above ground. They were never seen again, their names deliberately erased from history. You never knew which fate awaited you until you reached the end of that 4-kilometre walk. That profound uncertainty was in itself a form of torture. For captured queens, the calculation was even more intricate. A dead queen quickly became a forgotten name, a trophy gathering dust dismissed within a week. But a living queen, utterly broken, visibly humiliated, a constant reminder of Roman power for years to come, that was considered far more valuable than any swift execution. Unless, of course, she was simply too dangerous to keep alive. The final decision rested entirely with the emperor, and you would not know his choice until a guard either presented you with the keys to a villa or led you to your sentence. In 60 CE, on a cold, wind-swept island at the very edge of the known world, a queen discovered precisely how little her crown meant to Rome. Her name was Boudica, and her story stands as one of the most brutal in Roman history. She was the queen of the Iceni, a proud Celtic tribe residing in what is now eastern England. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had dedicated his entire reign to maintaining a fragile peace with Rome. He paid their exorbitant taxes. He meticulously adhered to their laws. He even bequeathed half of his kingdom to Emperor Nero in his will, a desperate last-ditch effort to safeguard his family after his death. The other half he left to his 2 young daughters. It was a reasonable plan, a calculated compromise that should have satisfied all parties. Rome ignored it completely. Within days of Prasutagus' death, imperial officials arrived, accompanied by a legion of soldiers. They declared without preamble that the entire kingdom now belonged to Rome. The will was meaningless. The decades-long alliance, meaningless. Decades of unwavering loyalty, utterly meaningless. They began to seize everything. Iceni nobles were dragged from their homes in the dead of night. Estates that had belonged to families for generations were confiscated before dawn. Relatives of the deceased king were chained and marched into bondage, their bewildered children forced to watch. Boudica protested. She was the queen. Her husband had been a loyal Roman ally. There were treaties. There were laws. She demanded an audience with the procurator, a man named Catuus Decianus. He agreed to meet with her. What transpired next was meticulously recorded by the Roman historian Tacitus, whose father-in-law served in Britain during this very period. Tacitus does not shy away from the horrific details. He does not soften the blow. He describes it with a raw, direct horror that clearly indicates even Romans were disturbed by the actions of their officials. Boudica was seized by soldiers openly in front of her own people. They humiliated her in the public square. The queen who had ruled valiantly beside her husband for decades was now degraded before her very subjects. They tied her to a post and they flogged her. A Roman flogging was not a mere lashing with a belt. They employed a flagellum, a brutal whip crafted with multiple leather strips, each embedded with cruel metal balls and sharp fragments of sheep bone. Each strike tore flesh from muscle. Each blow left wounds that would scar for life. Victims frequently died from the flogging alone. Boudica survived, but the flogging was not the worst part. Her daughters, unnamed, unmarried, were dragged forward. Soldiers seized them, not gently. They were led away towards the soldiers' quarters. And Boudica, still bound, still bleeding, understood. The scream that tore from her throat was not human language. It was the raw, primal shriek of a mother watching her children vanish into an unimaginable fate. She thrashed against the ropes, wrists tearing, bleeding anew. A desperate, futile struggle. Her pleas in a language the Romans could not care to understand. The soldiers only laughed. Tacitus merely states they were handed over to the soldiers. He didn't need to elaborate. Every Roman reading his account understood the meaning of that phrase. This was not a private act. It was done deliberately, openly, in front of the Iceni people, in front of their queen. Boudica, lashed to her post, forced to watch. To close her eyes would have been to abandon them, to deny the horror with the last shred of her dignity. This was Rome's message. Your queen is nothing. Your princesses are nothing. Your entire tribe is nothing. Catus Decianus fully expected the Iceni to submit after this monstrous display. He anticipated them to be too terrified, too utterly broken to even contemplate resistance. He was catastrophically wrong. Within weeks, Boudica had raised an army. Boudica, not just the Iceni. Word of what had befallen the royal family spread across Britain like wildfire. Tribes who had tolerated Roman rule for decades suddenly saw their own daughters in those princesses, their own wives in that flogged queen. They came by the thousands, then the tens of thousands. Boudica led them first to Camulodunum, the Roman capital of Britain. The city boasted no walls. The Roman veterans who resided there had grown soft, complacent, utterly convinced their conquered subjects would never dare to rise. The Iceni burned it to the ground. They spared no one. Men, women, children, slaves, anyone with even the slightest connection to Rome. They took no prisoners. They asked for no surrender. This was not conquest. This was raw, unbridled revenge. Londinium was next, the largest trading city in Roman Britain. The Romans attempted a desperate evacuation, but thousands were left behind in the chaotic scramble. Boudica's army showed no mercy. Archaeologists have since unearthed a distinct layer of burned debris across the very foundations of modern London, precisely dating to this period. A vivid red line of destruction, marking how completely the city was annihilated. Tacitus claims the final death toll reached 70,000 Romans and Roman allies across these ravaged cities. Other ancient sources suggest the figure was even higher, a testament to the Iceni's fury. And through it all, Boudica led from the front, a fearsome figure riding her chariot, her two daughters, the very ones who had been wronged in that public square, standing defiantly beside her, witnessing the Roman cities burn. Tacitus meticulously preserved a speech he attributed to her before the final decisive battle. Standing before her vast, vengeful army, she declared that she came not as a queen fighting for her kingdom. She came as a mother, consumed by rage, avenging the unspeakable acts committed against her daughters. The final confrontation occurred at a location never precisely identified. Roman discipline, their superior tactical positioning, and their professional legions ultimately overwhelmed Boudica's larger but more disorganized force. The rebellion, despite its initial devastating success, was crushed. Boudica, refusing to suffer the indignity of capture and the inevitable Roman triumph, chose death by poison. She understood intimately what Rome did to captured queens. She had already tasted their cruelty. Her daughters vanish from history after the initial assault. Their names were never recorded, their ultimate fates remain tragically unknown. Perhaps they fell in battle, dying alongside their mother. Perhaps they too took poison. Or perhaps, most chillingly, they were captured, forced to endure the very fate Boudica had fought so valiantly to avenge. We will never know their story. Rome, in its meticulous cruelty, ensured that. 40 years before Boudica painted Britain red with Roman blood, another queen discovered that sometimes survival itself is its own unique form of torture. Her name was Thusnelda, and her story might very well be the cruelest of all. Not for the physical torments inflicted upon her body, but for the slow, agonizing destruction wrought upon her very bloodline. She was the wife of Arminius, a chieftain of the Germanic Cherusci tribe. This was the man who had handed Rome its most humiliating military defeat in its entire history. You might not recognize his name, but you almost certainly know his monumental achievement. In 9 CE, Arminius masterfully ambushed 3 entire Roman legions deep within the treacherous Teutoburg forest. 15,000 Roman soldiers marched into that forest. Almost none of them walked out alive. 3 days of relentless slaughter unfolded in the driving rain and thick mud. The legionary eagles, the sacred standards that embodied Rome itself, were captured by barbarians. The Roman commander, Varus, chose to take his own life rather than endure the shame of being captured alive. When news of this catastrophe reached Emperor Augustus, then the most powerful man in the world, he reportedly wandered his palace for months afterward, banging his head against the walls, screaming into the darkness, "Varus, give me back my legions!" Rome never forgot that devastating defeat. They never forgave it. And when they proved unable to capture Arminius himself, they relentlessly pursued everyone he loved. Thusnelda was ultimately betrayed by her own father. His name was Segestes, a Germanic chief who had vehemently opposed his daughter's marriage to Arminius from the very beginning. Segestes had always been a staunch supporter of Rome, always believing that cooperation and appeasement were far superior to futile resistance. When Roman forces returned to Germania seeking relentless revenge, Segestes saw a perfect opportunity to prove his unswerving loyalty. He kidnapped his own daughter, his own pregnant daughter, and handed her over to the legions. Let that horrifying detail truly sink in. Her own father. While she carried his grandchild, he traded his daughter and his unborn grandchild for Roman favour, for petty political advantage, for a mere pat on the head from the very empire that sought to destroy everything his people had ever built. The Romans were, of course, absolutely delighted. They could not have Arminius, but they had the next best thing, his wife and his unborn heir. They kept Thusnelda imprisoned, but crucially alive. They allowed her to give birth in captivity to a son named Thumelicus. He was the heir to Arminius, the prince of the Cherusci, the living grandson of Rome's greatest military humiliation. They waited patiently until 17 CE, when the general Germanicus finally amassed enough victories in Germania to justify a triumph of his own, and that's when they paraded Thusnelda through Rome. Imagine this scene if you can. A Germanic queen, the proud wife of the man who had brought Emperor Augustus to tears, now walking in chains through streets overflowing with Romans who had lost fathers, brothers, sons in that accursed forest. In her arms, she held her infant son, Thumelicus. The crowd didn't just jeer, they howled for blood, they screamed for the baby to be killed right there in the street. Mothers, consumed by grief and rage, pointed at the child and told their own children, "That is the spawn of the monster who killed your uncle, your father, your grandfather." Child in the crowd hurled a stone. It struck Thusnelda's shoulder, then another stone, then another. Roman soldiers were forced to form a protective barrier around her, not to protect her from harm, but to ensure she survived long enough to complete the entire humiliating procession. The Roman writer Strabo described Thusnelda's face during the triumph. He fully expected her to weep, to beg, to collapse in despair like so many prisoners before her. She did not. She walked with her eyes fixed straight ahead, an unwavering gaze. Her face revealed nothing. No fear, no tears, no satisfaction given to the ravenous mob that so desperately yearned to see her broken. But here's what Strabo and no Roman in that baying crowd could ever see inside her. Thusnelda was making a promise, a silent, fierce vow, not to the gods, not to her husband, still fighting somewhere in the dark forests of Germania. This promise was for the infant boy pressed against her chest. She whispered it so softly that no one could hear, in the Germanic tongue that Romans neither understood nor cared to. They will not be whatever they do, wherever they take you, you are the son of Arminius. You carry his blood. And one day... She never finished the promise aloud, because deep down she already knew she couldn't keep it. She held her son against her chest and walked 4 kilometers through an ocean of pure distilled hatred. But her defiance, her queenly stoicism, could not protect him from Rome's insidious plans. Thumelicus was raised as a Roman slave, the heir to Germania's greatest hero. The prince who should have led his people against Rome was instead trained as a gladiator. Pause for a moment and consider the profound, chilling implications of that. Romans flocked to the arena to witness prisoners fight for their entertainment. They leisurely ate figs and sipped wine, while men struggled for their lives on the blood-stained sand. They cheered wildly when combat ended, when a body fell, when victory was declared. And somewhere within that very arena, fighting for their amusement, was the son of the man who had defeated 3 entire legions. The emperors knew exactly who he was. Every time they watched him fight, they were observing the son of their greatest enemy, struggling merely to survive. Every wound he sustained was a form of delayed revenge for the massacre at Teutoburg. Every time he prevailed, he was, in a twisted way, proving that Rome had utterly broken the bloodline of Arminius. Most Romans in the vast crowd had no idea. They simply saw another barbarian with a sword fighting to survive another day. But that was precisely the point. The Prince of the Cherusci reduced to anonymous entertainment. His royal blood meaning nothing. His father's legacy slowly erased with every fight. Did Thumelicus ever know who he was? Did anyone ever whisper to him that his father was a legendary hero? That his mother had been a queen? That he was destined to lead armies, not to die for fleeting applause? Or did he grow up believing he was nothing more than a slave, just another expendable body for the arena? We will never know, because Rome meticulously ensured no one recorded his personal story. The sparse historical sources say he died at Ravenna, lost in the chaotic anonymity of the arena, the very last of Arminius's bloodline. His life ended on the sand, while Romans cheered and consumed their midday meal. Nobody recorded the name of his final opponent. Nobody remembered his last words. He was simply another fallen gladiator, another body removed as the crowd eagerly awaited the next fight. And that, tragically, was precisely what Rome desired. Thusnelda herself vanishes from history after the triumph. There is no record of her death, no further mention of her fate. She likely spent her remaining years as a household slave somewhere in Italy, scrubbing floors, serving food, obeying orders from people who were not fit to carry her sandals when she was a queen. Did she ever learn what happened to her son? Did she overhear whispers from other slaves? Did she die clinging to the desperate hope that he was still alive somewhere, still fighting? Or did she die knowing, with crushing certainty, that the promise she had whispered during the triumph, the promise that they wouldn't break him, had been shattered before he could even remember her face? The woman who had stood beside the greatest Germanic hero of all time, reduced to mere property. Her husband dead, her son lost forever in the arena, her treacherous father living comfortably as a Roman collaborator, generously rewarded for his betrayal. That was Roman mercy, not swift death, not even public torture, just a slow, agonizing erasure of everything you ever were. Now you can begin to understand the maelstrom of thoughts swirling within Zenobia's mind during those 4 agonizing kilometers. She knew about Boudica. Every queen in the ancient world knew about Boudica. Her story was passed down, a stark, visceral warning. This is what happens when Rome decides to make an example of you. She knew about Thusnelda, about the son raised as a gladiator, about the slow, deliberate destruction of an entire bloodline. So when Zenobia felt those heavy golden chains crushing her wrists, she wasn't merely experiencing physical pain. She was calculating, strategizing even in her defeat. Would Aurelian execute her, making her a martyr? Would he hand her over to his soldiers as Boudica had been? Or would he keep her alive, a visible trophy, forced to watch her own children be absorbed, assimilated, into the very empire that had utterly destroyed hers? 4 kilometers filled with those tormenting thoughts, 1,000,000 Romans screaming for her blood. And at the very end, she received the door that did not lead to the execution chamber. Emperor Aurelian had made a cold, pragmatic calculation of his own. Zenobia was simply too famous to be summarily executed. For 5 years, she had ruled an empire that stretched across the entire Roman East. She had minted coins bearing her own regal face, boldly declared herself Queen of Egypt, and styled herself as the new Cleopatra. Killing her would elevate her to a martyr, a powerful symbol of resistance, a name that rebels across the empire would invoke for centuries to come. But keeping her alive, visible, utterly dependent on Rome for everything, that, Aurelian reasoned, told a far more compelling story. Look at Zenobia. Look at the formidable Queen of the East. She dared to challenge us, and now she lives at our pleasure, eating our food, obeying our laws, grateful merely to be alive. Aurelian granted her a magnificent villa in Tiber, about 30 kilometers from Rome, a comfortable prison, a gilded cage. The Historia Augusta tells us what happened next. Zenobia, the warrior queen who had once humiliated 3 emperors, eventually married a Roman senator, settling into the life of a Roman matron. She attended dinner parties where guests whispered excitedly about her tumultuous past. She walked through crowded markets where people openly pointed and stared. She raised daughters who would never know the vast empire their mother had so fiercely built. Daughters who learned Latin instead of Aramaic, who worshipped Roman gods instead of the ancient deities of Palmyra. Her daughters eventually married into influential Roman noble families. They raised children who would grow up thinking of themselves as wholly Roman. Within 3 generations, the once proud bloodline of the Queen of the East had been completely absorbed. No one would remember they carried the blood of a woman who once controlled more territory than most Roman emperors. That was the true genius, the insidious brilliance of Rome. They didn't merely defeat their enemies, they erased them, absorbed them, transformed conquered bloodlines into loyal Roman citizens who celebrated the very empire that had destroyed their ancestors. Boudica chose death rather than live as Rome's trophy. Her rebellion, though it claimed 70,000 Roman lives, ultimately failed, and her daughters vanished from the pages of history. Thus Nelda watched her son become a gladiator, watched him die for a Roman entertainment, and spent her remaining years as a forgotten slave. Zenobia survived. She had comfort, she had status, but every single day for the rest of her life she woke up knowing with absolute certainty that her existence was contingent upon Rome's permission. Every meal she ate, every bed she slept in, every hushed conversation she had, all of it was a gift from the empire that had systematically dismantled everything she had built. Was that mercy? Or was that the most sophisticated, enduring torture of all? The Mamertine prison still stands in Rome today. You can visit it, walk through its ancient chambers, take photographs, even post them online for the world to see. Tourists stand in the very same cold, dark chambers where Rome ended its enemies in secret, while celebrations thundered and echoed in the streets above. The cobbled streets where Zenobia once walked in golden chains are now bustling shopping districts. People sip espresso in the very forum where crowds once roared for captured queens to be utterly destroyed. We, in our modern world, have sanitized this history. We've transformed profound suffering into picturesque scenery, just as the Romans themselves once did. Zenobia survived those chains. She lived out her days in a Roman villa, comfortable, yes, but perpetually watched, forever dependent. Yet her servants whispered stories. They said she often woke shaking from nightmares, that her eyes sometimes drifted, mid-conversation, lost in unspoken memories she would never articulate aloud, that she prayed alone in a language Rome could never fully erase from her soul. She never returned to Palmyra, never again saw her magnificent throne. When she finally died, she was buried in Roman soil under a Roman name. The Queen of the East erased almost completely, but not entirely. Boudica's story survived. The Snelda's story survived. Rome desperately wanted them forgotten, their legacies crushed under the weight of an empire that sought absolute dominion over history itself. Yet 2,000 years later, someone is still telling their story. They were meant to be silenced, utterly obliterated, but silence is not true erasure, and forgotten is not truly gone. History is filled with such untold narratives, with voices that were meant to remain silent forever. These are the chapters history tried to erase, the stories buried under the glorious narratives of conquerors, because the past is never truly dead. It's waiting, lingering in the dark corners of time, waiting for someone, anyone, to remember, to listen, to speak. These women, these queens, faced the crushing machinery of the Roman Empire, a force designed to break the will and erase the identity of its most formidable foes. They were not just individuals, they were symbols. Zenobia, the calculating survivor, chose a life of gilded imprisonment, her bloodline slowly absorbed, her legacy subtly rewritten by the empire she once defied. Her choice, a pragmatic one, allowed her to continue breathing, but at the cost of her very essence, her identity as the Queen of the East. Her defiance, once overt and glorious, became an internal battle against the complete assimilation of her spirit. Thus Nelda, the defiant captive, walked through a gauntlet of hatred, her infant son a living trophy in her arms. Her silent promise, "They will not break you," was tragically unfulfilled, as her son was groomed for the arena, his princely birthright twisted into a spectacle of Roman entertainment. Her suffering, a slow burn, was etched not just on her body, but in the fate of her heir, a cruel testament to Rome's ability to desecrate even the most sacred of bonds. Her disappearance from history is a final, chilling punctuation mark, leaving her ultimate fate to our darkest imaginings. Boudica, the avenging mother, ignited a blaze of rebellion, a fiery response to unspeakable horrors. Her choice was not to survive as a trophy, but to fight, to unleash a vengeance that stained Britain with Roman blood. Her fierce, uncompromising refusal to be subjugated became a legend, a testament to the power of a mother's rage. Though her rebellion ultimately failed, her story, unlike her daughter's, endured, a warning and an inspiration echoing through the centuries. Each queen faced Rome's might, and each made a choice in the face of inevitable destruction. Their stories, woven together, illustrate the multifaceted cruelty of an empire that mastered not only conquest but also psychological warfare. The triumph, the villa, the arena, the flogging, these were not random acts but carefully crafted tools, each designed to strip away dignity, identity, and hope. The enduring lesson from these queens is not merely one of defeat, but of the persistence of the human spirit, the quiet strength that defies ultimate erasure. Even when names are forgotten, even when bloodlines are absorbed, the echoes of their struggle remain. They remind us that history is not a monolithic narrative, but a mosaic of voices, many silenced, some forgotten, but none entirely gone. They await our rediscovery, a chance to lend our ears to the whispered tales of resilience, betrayal, and the unyielding will to simply be. So when you consider these stories, understand that they are more than just historical accounts. They are a profound reflection on power, resistance, and the subtle, often devastating ways in which narratives are shaped and reshaped across time. They compel us to look beyond the celebratory monuments and into the dark human cost of empire. And in doing so, we might just find the courage to pull more voices out of the silence, allowing their truths to finally resonate, centuries after they were meant to be forgotten. Because the past isn't dead. It's waiting in the dark, waiting for someone to listen.